Welcome to Success in Brief with your host, Rosanne Felicello. In every episode, we feature successful women attorneys and other business professionals to reflect on what career advice would you give your younger self. We hope to provide insights and inspiration toward your professional success. You can find this show at www.felicellolaw.com and on YouTube, LinkedIn, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and more. Now, here's the host of Success in Brief, Rosanne Felicello.
Hello, my name is Rosanne Felicello, and this is Success in Brief. I'm thrilled today to welcome my good friend Damali Peterman to the podcast. Damali is an attorney and an entrepreneur. She currently runs Breakthrough ADR. She provides mediation services, education, and consultation. She's also a JAMS mediator and arbitrator, and she's currently working on a book that's going to be coming out soon. So we have a lot to talk about, and just welcome, Damali.
Thank you, Rosanne. I'm so delighted to be on your show today.
I've known Damali since before she left Big Law, and so I'm really excited to catch up on all the things that she's been up to since then. And so thank you again for being here, and we can't wait to hear about your story of success. So tell us, what was your path to becoming an attorney, going to law school?
It's an interesting question. I remember thinking that I loved advocating for people. I was born the oldest of 7 children. And so I felt like I was always, either advocating for them, for myself, and I was literally in the middle of my parents and them. And so that was probably the beginning of my early advocacy days. I wanted to figure out the best course of action. And I think that led me to a few places. One, to education, so to teaching, which I get to do with my company, Breakthrough ADR, and then also advocating for other people, helping people to express themselves, to get what they wanted in a negotiation, and also to make sure they had the contractually appropriate either instruments or whatever they needed to effectuate the arrangement or agreement. And so that was kind of my path. I didn't have any lawyers in my family as role models. And so I sort of had to find my own role models in the law, which there were many at my law school and also at the firm I worked for. But yeah, that was my path to law.
I love that. I'm sure that helps you today with mediation as well. Being able to mediate those family dynamics, I'm sure it comes in handy.
Oh, definitely. Oftentimes, even though the issue might be one of employment or breach of contract or what have you, oftentimes what's at stake is the relationship, respect, all of these sort of intangibles that come into play. And so you learn those things both informally and informally.
Yes. I feel like I've learned with my kids how to be a better lawyer sometimes, right? Because you're being able to advocate disputes between them, or, figure out who wins, who gets to take the first shower or the last shower, whatever it is that they want that day. You have to navigate it. So it's very interesting.
I feel the same way with my kids. In fact, sometimes I'll be negotiating with them or telling them something and not realizing that they're negotiating with me. And then I have to admit or concede because they're exhibiting some great negotiation skills.
I feel like sometimes I've taught them too well. They answer me like, somebody should answer a deposition. I'll just answer the specific question I've asked. I'm like, oh, you know how to do that already.
The kids of lawyers, right?
Exactly. So Damali, you went to law school at Howard University,
Yes.
Great school. And so what brought you to New York City?
Interestingly enough, I did attend Howard University, and I'm actually an adjunct professor there now teaching mediation.
Oh
So
my
it's
goodness,
all
that's
full
fantastic.
circle. But that is such a great question, Roseanne, because I never envisioned myself living in New York City. I'm actually a native Washingtonian. I'm from Washington, D.C. originally. And I thought that I was going to actually return to California, where I went to graduate school when I received my master's degree. So I never knew that I would be in New York. I was really fortunate to be a 1L associate at Weil Gotshal and Manges, and it was there that I tell people I fell in love with two things. One, practicing law in New York, and two, my now husband, Chad Peterman.
Aw,
So
I
that's
love
what
that
happened.
story. Chad's a great guy, so that's a fantastic story. I love it.
So that's what
Good.
brought me to New York, the firm and Chad.
Well, that's a good combination, you know.
Yeah, so far they've both led me to great places. So
So you mentioned you started out at Wild God Shell, and I know you were there for a number of years. At what point did you decide to leave the big law track and move on?
Oh, what a great question. I love working at Wow. I really did. I had great mentors, I had great sponsors, I had great friends. In fact, two of the godparents for both of my kids were women that I met at Wow.
Wow.
And so it was a wonderful community for me. I was poached by a client to go work in house at Deloitte. And so that is what happened. It was the right time
Mhm.
and the right opportunity. And so I took a leap.
That's very interesting. And so at Deloitte, were you practicing law at Deloitte as well?
Yes, so I was a assistant general counsel in the office of general counsel, and I focused primarily on engagement. And I was
Mm,
one of those people who was brought in to help work with Deloitte and Touche, but I ended up helping with Deloitte Consulting, Deloitte
mm.
Financial Advisory Services, Deloitte Corporate Finance. And so it was such a wonderful array of skills that I learned at Weil that I was able to sort of plug into different areas and different engagements at Deloitte.
Oh, that's great. And so then what made you move on from Deloitte? Because I know you had opened up your own law practice. So what made you make that transition?
Right. And so when I was a kid, I think at the age of 14, my first job in DC, and in DC, they have the summer youth program, which they also have in New York. My job was actually to take an entrepreneurship course at George Washington University.
Oh,
And
that's
so for
fantastic.
4 hours a day, 5 days a week, I learned about, what it meant to be an entrepreneur. And so fast forward to, I never knew like what I would do with that knowledge I gained as a 14-year-old, but I knew I wanted to start my own company. And so I think what pushed me in the direction of starting it then was it was right at the end of the U.S. presidential elections, and the election and the results came in,
Mm,
and I remember thinking, now is probably a good time to start my own conflict resolution practice. The world's going to need some conflict resolvers, and so I did. I gave notice at Deloitte. And I said, look, I'm going to start my own company and, I'm excited about it. And I thought about it like this. I wrote down all the things that I knew how to do. And then
mhm,
I circled what I love to do. And then I said, my company is going to provide these things. And then I reached out to people like you and others who are already like kind of branched out and started their own practices to learn from people who were doing it and to
mhm.
see like what I should do and also what not to do when
Yeah,
starting a
that's
practice.
a big
And
thing.
that
Yeah.
that was very important because I feel like you don't have to reinvent the wheel. And there were a lot of practical things that, people taught me who
Hmm.
are in the legal field like you, but then other people who had products companies
Sure.
and they were like, "Oh, I don't know how to help you. You're a lawyer, you're in the service industry." And I was like, "Well, what phone service do you use?" I mean, I need like practical things like that. Like I don't know what phone service to use for my company. And so it was really helpful when I decided to make that leap and transition out of Deloitte to get some help in terms of consulting with really smart people, and also to sort of say, now's the time. If I was 14 when the seed was planted, let's see, how was that then? Probably 20 plus years after that. And so it was time.
It's time to do it, right?
Yeah.
That's great. I love that, and I love that you drew on sort of the relationships that you had built up, through your years of practice, to be able to be in a position to, take some shortcuts where you could, right? There's you can't always take a shortcut, but if you can take some shortcuts to get to, your success a little bit faster, I think that's helpful. So you had your own practice since 2017, but then you recently branched out and you were doing some ADR in that practice. Maybe for our listeners or viewers, can you explain what ADR is? So that's the sort
Certainly.
of term of art that we use as attorneys all the time, but
Certainly. So ADR stands for Alternative Dispute Resolution. And if you think about the continuum of dispute resolution, how do people resolve conflicts? Oftentimes, people are most familiar with litigation, right?
Mhm.
Because that's popularized on TV. There's so many shows about litigation. People actually say to each other, "I'll sue you," or "I'll see you in court." And so people like have this idea that if there's a problem, we're going to court. So that's at one end of the continuum. Before we get there, some other options are just negotiation. So, two or more people trying to sort it out themselves without a third party. Then there's mediation. Now you have a third party neutral who's literally in the middle of the parties who have different interests. It's similar to the way that I was in the middle of my parents and my siblings. Um, and then you have arbitration. Well, actually, before that, you have conciliation or shuttle diplomacy, where you have someone who's going back and forth between parties who have an issue, and they may not ever sort of be in the same room. So that person is literally serving as a shuttle. And then you have arbitration, where now you have someone who is a third party who is a decision maker. So
Mm.
when the other types of dispute resolution, the person who was in the middle, that neutral person, was not a decision maker. But in arbitration, you have a decision maker. And then, of course, in litigation, you have a decision maker or makers, whether it's a jury of your peers, a judge, or a bench of judges. And so for ADR, for me, is something that I think is great to educate people on the different ways that they can have their disputes resolved. And I was an anomaly in a sense, because before I went to law school, I studied conflict resolution. My master's degree is in international policy studies. I studied with a focus on conflict resolution. I studied in The Hague. And so oftentimes lawyers get to, they decide they want to go into mediation or arbitration after they've, litigated for many years. Usually we have more litigators than transactional lawyers like myself. But actually mediated and started mediating before I went to law school. So I'm a huge fan of ADR, and especially mediation.
That's fascinating that you had that experience pre-law. It must have been, a really good foundation for everything that you learn in law school, having had seen some of that, sort of live and in person beforehand.
Yeah, it's funny you should say that. When I was a first year law student, one of my favorite professors, and who's now a colleague because I'm an adjunct at the law school, he told me this many years later, like maybe in the last couple of years, and I've graduated from law school many years ago now. But he said to me that after a class, I think it was civil procedure, and after a class, I like went up to him and I had this chart on like how it could have been resolved, whatever the case was. I had made this whole chart. And he said, I thought, this student's either a genius or she's crazy, because no one has ever like dissected this case in civil procedure the way that she did. And I was like, so is the jury still out on that? Have you decided which direction? He did. He was one of the recommenders for me taking on the adjunct role at the school. So we know what direction he took. But it was a very great foundation. And because I had that foundation, that's why I'm committed to educating business students, law students, undergraduate students. I think that if people are aware of the different approaches to resolving conflict, then as they go into their various careers, then they'll think about and consider different ways they can resolve their issues.
I mean, I think it's so important. Even clients that come to me, oftentimes they think they want to go into litigation because that's what they know, right? That's what they've
Mhm.
seen, as you said, portrayed in popular media. Litigation's drama, 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 and sometimes that's because oftentimes when you come to a dispute, you have a lot of feelings, right? People have a lot of feelings, and even when it's a corporate dispute, a commercial dispute, they still have a lot of feelings about it. Often, it's
True.
not really just the money, right? There's always something else going on. But sometimes it doesn't make sense to litigate right away. sometimes it doesn't make sense to litigate at all. Sometimes what makes sense is to try to resolve it quickly outside of court, whether it's through formal mediation and with a mediator like yourself from JAMS or, another agency, although we do prefer JAMS. But, whether it's with a mediator or with just a informal settlement negotiations, or a demand letter with a negotiation, sometimes that's a better resolution for the client, rather than filing something in court that is actually really, it adds fuel to the fire a lot of times, because now it's public and there's really no going back. You can certainly withdraw, but you're really not going to take away that sort of public, display, I guess, of whatever feelings you were had at that moment in time when you decided to bring the suit. So I think that's
That's true. And litigation, I mean, I don't want to sound like I'm anti-litigation. Um,
don't do
Oftentimes,
that.
yeah, I'm not definitely not anti-litigation. And oftentimes, people, when we're mediating the cases, they're either in litigation already and settlement discussions with the mediator, or they're pre-litigation and their BATNA, their best alternative to a negotiated agreement, is to litigate. And
Right.
so they want to see how successful they can be in mediation. And if it works, that's great, because mediation is usually more cost effective and efficient than going to court, and sometimes it can be more productive because you kind of have the decision making ability within yourself before relinquishing it over to again, a jury, or a judge or bench, a panel of judges. And so I think that litigation is something that is, it works when it works. I just what I always want to do is make sure people know, oh, did you know you could also, these are the options that you have. And especially in a world where now sometimes it takes a little bit longer to have your day in court, especially with the
Exactly.
backlog that I mean, this, I mean, more than
Definitely.
anyone. You might want to ask yourself, if you're in conflict, how long can you deal with this conflict, right? Can you wait whatever the period of time is to have your day in court, or is this something that you would like to resolve sooner?
No, it's definitely true. And I think it's all about just, choosing the right tool, right? Choosing the right scalpel for the issue. If it's a smaller issue or it's something that, you know, you can reach an agreement on, you're not that far apart, then oftentimes it's better to settle it out of court, where you can control sort of the framework and what the solution is going to look like. Because once you go to court, you're really within the framework of what the law provides, which may not be the same thing.
That's right.
So it's very, very fascinating. We do a lot of mediation and arbitration as well.
Well, I feel like it's always helpful to be represented by counsel, whether you go to litigation or not. It's helpful to have someone there who understands the law, who can evaluate the strengths and weaknesses of the case. And so that's another thing that that I love educating people on, is like, even if you go to mediation or arbitration, it's good to have a lawyer with you, who is familiar with the processes.
Exactly. And that really dovetails into my next question, was really what skills from being a practicing attorney do you bring to your ADR practice?
That's a great question. I think the most important skill is listening, and active listening. It's so essential, because people are going to, whether you are serving as a lawyer, serving as a counselor, serving as, an advisor in any capacity, and not just in the legal realm, but a school counselor or religious advisor or what have you. What all of those different people have in common is that they're listening, and they're actively listening to get a better sense of what's going on. They're picking up on verbal cues and also nonverbal cues.
Mm.
And to me, I can usually have an indication. I have a good indication of what someone is thinking, how they're feeling, um, based on just being quiet, not
Mhm.
speaking as much as they are, listening, asking open-ended questions. That's the next skill that is key. Oftentimes people fill in the blanks, and if you just ask open questions, what else? Tell me more. People will usually tell you things that even in the best crafted question, you would not have known to ask that, a question that would have led to that answer. And so active listening, open-ended questions, drafting. I mean, regardless of whether you're a transactional lawyer a litigator or something else, the ability to write and to
Mhm.
draft contracts, agreements, even answers, if whatever filings you're doing in court, all extremely important. And then I would say, finally, just the attention to detail. And so, on the other side of writing is, of course, like reading and taking in the information. On the other side of listening is, of course, communicating, like output, right? So how you're communicating and interacting with people, and in what, regardless of whether you're serving as a lawyer or as a mediator or as a writer, being able to build rapport and trust and connect with another person, will all are all vital.
That That's a great response, and it makes me think of some of the issues that we've
No,
had to deal with. Oh no, did we lose you?
I'm sorry, I'm still here.
No, no problem. I can see you now.
Sorry about that.
Not a problem. We all have tech issues. Actually, the question I was going to ask you is related to tech issues. How have you been affected, your ADR practice by the COVID and having to do things via Zoom? Have you found it more difficult or challenging to pick up on these nonverbal cues? I know I find it challenging to appear in court virtually. I don't think it's the same at all. And I was wondering what your perspective was on that.
That's interesting because, on the one hand, being able to do this job virtually means that there are no borders anymore, right? So, I can have clients or cases all over, with people being in different parts of the world. And even before COVID, I was teaching virtually. I was teaching in person too, but I was also teaching virtually, and it allowed me to travel and to be, teaching in Japanese time to university in Japan, even though I was in New York. Um, and so, on the one hand, I think that being able to do this virtually has opened up a lot, and also it's made ADR more accessible to people who maybe would have had some difficulties coming in, to a conference room or to a court. The other side of that is exactly what you're saying, where sometimes you don't know if someone else is in the room. While
Mhm.
we do ask all attendees to, attest that no one else is in the room with them, there's no way for you to know that. Um, Sometimes are only, oftentimes you're only seeing the top half of someone, so you don't know if they're exhibiting any other types of behaviors that if you saw them in person, you would know to call for a break or to ask a certain question. And so it has required, um, practitioners to really hone their skills, to think more about the questions that they're asking, to sort of kind of put the people into the room, even though they're on a box on the computer. Uh, I have a mediation coming up in person. It's the first one in person since COVID. They've
Oh,
all
wow.
been virtual. Yeah. And so what's funny about that is that I'm like, wow, this is going to be in person again. Like, thinking about the in-person dynamics, things that you didn't have to worry about, like running into someone in the ladies' room,
Mhm.
or like things like that you don't have to think about when you're virtual. So it's interesting how, when you transition between the different styles, you have to put on sort of a different thinking cap, to prepare yourself.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's exactly the types of dynamics that we think about, even just going to court. But it's interesting to see how it's going to be for you. I'm excited that you're getting to do your first one in person in so long. That'll be great.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I'm excited about it for many reasons, also including the fact that there's always a delicious spread of food and snacks, and so I've managed to avoid that. Doing it from home, I just drink sparkling water all day, so I'm worried about how I'm going to engorge myself in person.
It's a casualty of returning to practice. Um, I wanted to talk a little bit about this book that you're writing. So tell us, what is the book about, and how did it come to be that you're getting to write it and it's picked up by Random House? It's very exciting.
Thank you. I'm very excited about it. What was happening was, I had read all the negotiation books, I'd taken all the negotiation courses, and I had been teaching negotiations. I mean, I've been negotiating as an attorney, for many years, and also sitting in the middle of negotiations as a neutral. And every time someone would ask for additional resources or like, what book should I read? I would kind of Frankenstein something together, Roseanne. I'd be like,
Mhm.
well, you can read a page of this, a chapter of that. But what was missing, and something that I thought was key, was the fact that none of the books really leaned in to bias and how
Mhm.
bias appears in negotiations, and especially when it comes to, women, when it comes to people of color, and whatever proverbial box one could potentially check. And I really wanted to write a book that showed people how to negotiate through bias, and
Mhm.
to actually, you know to me, it was something that was so key and essential, and it's something that when I say it was overlooked, many of the authors of books on negotiations don't look like you and I. And so I just kind of felt like it was something that, if it were written by me or you, it would have been obvious. Like, this is something that happens. This happens in
Right.
every negotiation. And I'm focusing more on unconscious bias, right? Because
Mhm.
that's something that, the person who is exhibiting those biases may not be aware of. Of course, direct and active, like prejudice, is different. But I wanted people to see themselves in my book. I wanted people to learn how to hone in on what they brought to the table, and instead of trying to negotiate like me and to be like me, even though I've had many successes at the table, and of course some challenges as well. I wanted to help people to have a guide that would help them to be the best negotiator they could be in the face of bias. So that's what my book is about. It was purchased by Penguin Random House, their Putnam imprint in the US, and Bonnier Heligo in the UK. And
Well,
so, very excited about it. It's scheduled to be published in the winter or spring of 2024, the beginning of 2024, which seems like it's a long time from now, but I assure you, like, I have a very tight timeline, and it feels like it's tomorrow to me. But that being said, I've been excited about writing and putting this together, and thinking about each person that I believe the book is intended, that the intended person, the intended reader is just thinking about each person, and how they're going to sort of interact with the book, and I'm very excited about it.
I mean, that sounds fascinating. It sounds like a very unique perspective in terms of what's out there and available now. So I think you'll have a very good market for it. And it sounds, I can't wait to read it, given that I know you have so much expertise to offer. I think it's going to be fabulous. So make sure that you let us know as soon as it comes out so we can pre-order or order a copy of it.
Absolutely.
Let's see. So, in addition to, so we mentioned that you have this business that you're running, and you're also writing a book, and you mentioned the children. So, how do you balance it all? I also know you love to travel. So, how do you balance it all?
I don't think I balance it all. I think that some things sort of fall by the wayside I'm focusing on something. That being said, um, I try to use systems. I try to write things down. I try to do the things that are important, and I try to let the things go that aren't as important. I guess it's some version of that matrix, the Eisenhower matrix, like important, not important, urgent, not urgent. I guess it's some variation of that. Um, and I have a lot of areas that I need to improve in when it comes to balance. My mind, I want to mediate on a not mediate, meditate on a I'm so programmed to mediate that I always think mediate. What's funny is autocorrect will often try to change mediate to meditate, because I think more people use that term. But I'm always like, no, mediate. And just now I did the slip up and said mediate. Um, but I would love to meditate more. I'd love to exercise more, things like that. So usually, I think that's what usually falls to the wayside. Like, I do all the things for everyone else, and then I'm like, oh yeah, I guess in that 10 minutes I had, I could have, free time, I could have meditated, but you know, and I have help. I have a lot of help, people to help me to accomplish the various tasks that I have to accomplish.
I think it's so important to have that help, right? And to lean on it and understand that that's the part of how you get it done. You can't possibly be expected to do it all. I tease my husband that I want a wife. I want a 1950s housewife. I'll be nice to her, but I just want someone to, cook the meals and clean the house and make sure the schedules run so that I can participate in family life, but not have to,
all
always
the
be doing the chores.
all the things that aren't as exciting as as what you really want to do, right?
Exactly. I don't think I'm getting one anytime soon.
Keep advocating for it.
I'm going to keep trying. So I think you've only become as successful as you are by making good relationships throughout your career. Would you agree with that?
Yes, 100%.
And so how do you do that? How do you foster those relationships?
That's an interesting question because I think um, first, sometimes they are just organic, right? And so, like, you meet someone, you have a connection, and whatever that connection is, that kind of helps you to build a relationship. Sometimes you have relationships that are for a specific purpose, right? So, like, at that moment in time, you're working on something, like, you have to have a social media person or whatever the case is. And so it's very specific what the scope of the relationship is. Um, and then sometimes people introduce you to people who they think, you would have something in common with, be simpatico or something to that effect. And so for me, I have found that it's a combination of the sort of organic and, I guess the opposite would be inorganic relationship building to start a relationship. I think what's as important as how you start the relationship is how you kind of water it to grow. And so I'm old school in the sense that I have stationery and I have stamps, and I'll write a letter so that my email doesn't get, caught in a myriad of other emails and overlooked. I try to remember to occasionally call people, but we've moved so far away from the phone culture that when sometimes you can call someone and they'll be like, "Is everything okay? You're
Yeah.
calling,"
Why are
so
you calling
yeah,
me?
like, "Why are you telling me?" That could have been a text or, no one says that, but that's what they're thinking, by the tone of their voice. Um, and I think it's important to see people, especially given the couple of years that we've had
Mhm.
where we were literally not allowed to see other people. We were prohibited rather from seeing other people. And so I think in order to keep relationships going, they're just like plants where you have to water them and rotate them and make sure they get enough sunlight and nutrients to continue to grow. Otherwise they'll wilt and they could potentially die out, and sometimes that's okay, right? Like, sometimes relationships can be seasonal and sometimes there can be perennials or annuals. So I just learned a lot about gardening this year, so I'm using those metaphors. Yeah. My
I
son and
like
I were
them.
talking about metaphors and analogies, so I'm like, wait.
I mean, it works, and it's helpful to think in terms of that. I think that's definitely true. There's sometimes that relationships were meant to last forever, and some that are, not meant to. But it doesn't mean they didn't bring something important into your life while they were there.
Absolutely.
Okay, I have three last questions for you. Are
Oh,
you
I'm
ready?
enjoying this. I can sit with you all day. You know this. I can talk to you all
Well, I
day.
mean, it's been a long time, so we'll have to have an off the record meetup soon, and we can spend
Absolutely.
some more time chatting. Um, okay, these are like supposedly rapid fire, but they don't always go that way. Let's see how it goes. If you couldn't be an attorney and like this, mediator, what career would you choose?
I would want to be a full-time writer.
A novelist or nonfiction?
Nonfiction for sure. I don't know. I guess I'm creative, but nonfiction for sure. I'm like, I don't know if I'm creative enough to have like a whole series. Like, I'm always in awe of people who have a series of like fiction books. Like, wow, how'd you think of all that?
Yeah, it's kind of amazing. Although what we do as attorneys, and I think especially as a mediator, is very creative. If you think
That's
about it,
true. That's true. Hmm.
you have to really think about different ramifications and down the road and foreshadowing.
This is true, and how things could turn out. That's true. Maybe I should dip my toe into fiction writing.
You can, yeah, anonymize some of your stories that you've heard through the years. I'm sure there's
Oh,
some
and I've
good
heard
ones
some
in there.
doozies. I've heard some mind-blowing stories.
Okay, question number 2. What is the one thing you wish you knew when you graduated from law school that you know now?
I think that law school is so competitive. The whole system is competitive. I say this as a graduate, as a professor. Um, I think that I wish I knew that the grades and things like that wouldn't matter as much, years out of law school, where as you start to practice law, you build a reputation as a practicing attorney, and those things tend to be more important. And I think that it would have been nice to have kind of, as a law student, felt a little bit of pressure taken away from the competitive nature of all the things that were happening, right? So the rankings, the on-campus interviews, like all those types of things. And so I wish I would have known to just like relax and enjoy law school a little bit more because the real practice of law is like 20 times more intense than that.
Yeah, in some ways it's good to get used to that pressure, right? I think it's
Yeah.
Billy King, the tennis player, who says pressure is a privilege.
Mm,
And I think that's actually true, right? I mean, that's how you make a diamond under pressure. That's what she says. So it's,
that's true.
pressure is
I
a
mean,
privilege
I'm
to,
doing my best writing under pressure. So
there you
pressure of
go.
these deadlines.
Yeah. Court deadlines, ADR deadlines,
Yeah.
writing. So finally, would you recommend a career in law to a woman today considering going to law school?
Yes, 100% yes.
And why is that?
I think that the foundation that one law school provides is something that's so key, and it's also portable because you learn how to analyze situations, facts, information, people. You learn how to exercise judgment. Um, Among other things, you learn how to listen. I mean, of course, we can all improve our listening skills. I train a lot of lawyers. And I think that it's something that, regardless of whether you are working at a company or a firm or you hang your own shingle, you just have the ability to do so many things. I know so many attorneys who practice law or who didn't practice law after law school, and they now are wedding planners or US, speaking of Billie Jean King, but tennis pros, or all in different. One has a very successful stationery company, um, and so the point is that I think one, a career in law is great, and you can do that all the way till the end of time, until you retire. Or if you want to diversify your life a little bit, either way, it's a great foundation to have.
I couldn't agree more. I think it's a great foundation for women, and I think it gives them an ability to have a career that is gives them some stability in terms of you can have a salary that is sufficient for you to survive on your own, which I think is really key and essential. You can provide for your family based on having that law degree. So to me, I think that's a key factor as well. Thank you, Damali. This has been amazing. It's always great to see you. So thank you so much for joining us today.
This has been wonderful, Roseanne. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast. I think what you're doing in terms of giving women a roadmap to think of different ways to utilize a legal career, to identify different ways that they've been successful, and to share this with other people listening, I think it's phenomenal. So thank you for this platform and for hosting this podcast.
Thanks so much.
You've been listening to Success in Brief with your host, Rosanne Felicello. Thank you for your positive reviews, comments, and sharing the show with others. You can catch prior episodes at www.felicellolaw.com and on YouTube, LinkedIn, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and more.